We want to welcome you all to today's session. This is part of a larger series offering mental health and suicide prevention training and technical assistance in response to the global pandemic. I'm Kelsey Schmitz, and I work for the University of Washington at the School Mental Health Assessment Research and Training Center, or SMART Center, as the school mental health lead to the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. Our center is located in Seattle. In response to this critical need for support during this very challenging time, a group of organizations based in the Northwest region have quickly formed an alliance to co-develop, co-deliver, co-sponsor, and co-brand content and resources, and give you access to school mental health experts and a wealth of other relevant information in this one spot. The Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center and the UW SMART Center are partnering with Forefront Suicide Prevention Center, the Association for Washington School Principals, Dr. Jim and Liz Mazza, who created the DBT in Schools curriculum, Northwest Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports Network, Sound Supports, and Well Educator LLC to bring you this well-being series that offers a variety of virtual learning opportunities for kids, families, and educators, focusing on mental health and suicide prevention. Today's session is part one of a three-part series for school leaders and will last 90 minutes. Next slide. You can learn more about the rest of the Wellbeing series by visiting the website here and checking out the other events that we have planned. If you have any questions, you can reach out to my amazing colleague, Megan Lucy. The Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network was funded by SAMHSA, which stands for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, in late 2018. The MHTTC network includes 10 regional centers, a National American Indian and Alaska Native Center, a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. We know that several of you are joining us from outside our Northwest region, and we want you to be aware that you have your own region that can provide you additional support and training and technical assistance. But you're always welcome to participate in any events offered by any center, and feel free to reach out to your own regional center as well. Next slide. So our Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center supports the school mental health workforce in Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. This is how you can get in touch with our Region 10 Northwest MHTTC Center. You see our website, our newsletter link, and social media accounts for a variety of ways that you can connect with us. We do send out monthly newsletters as well as training and resource blasts, so please sign up to be in the know about what we're offering. The link will be provided in the chat. Yep, next slide. So this meeting is being recorded, as you all know, and we'll be posting those recordings and providing the link where you can find that information. Participants are muted and your videos are off for our time together. We want to encourage you to use the Q&A feature. We have reserved just a little bit of time after this session for a few questions, but as part of this series, the last session is really devoted to question and answers, and that's on June 4th. So even if we don't get to your questions today, we encourage you to still use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we can answer those if we don't today on June 4th. All right, so to kick off this series, I want to pass it off to Kurt Hatch. Kurt is an associate director at the Association of Washington School Principals. He's a former teacher, instructional coach, and award-winning principal. He's served as a leader in a variety of systems, including Puyallup, Kent, University Place, North Thurston in Washington, and in Shanghai, China. His work includes policy analysis, advocacy, leading the Mastering Principal Leadership Network, and facilitating professional learning on topics such as system improvement, distributed leadership, and equity, bias, and race. Kurt also mentors early career principals and trains school leaders on the implementation of a school-wide student support system that has helped recapture thousands of hours of instructional time, increase teacher efficacy, and eliminate the use of suspension. We deeply appreciate the partnership that we have with AWSP, helping us to meet one of our goals to prioritize support for school leaders, and couldn't be more thankful that they've joined us in our efforts to bring you this series.
Thank you, Kelsey. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Is that, Kelsey, can you hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Yeah, the Association of Washington School Principals is also really pleased to be a partner in this work. It's a priority to us because of our mission, and you can see it up there. It's pretty plain, but to the point. Our job is really in Washington as the association for about 98% of all principals and assistant principals is just to support them, support their role, and and do so in the education of all students. Next slide. Thank you. So we have a pretty clear mission with just two goals. One is around equity, and it looks like I have a little extra letter there under goal 1B, but our first is to lead on diversity and equity, specifically calling out issues of race for those who have been minoritized or historically underserved. Goal 2 is to support longer principal tenures within their building, and also to make the job more tenable. Right now, we know that only 1 in 4 principals remain in the same building after 5 years. And so that tells us a lot about the role of the school leader and some of the stress and the nuance of the job that makes it extra complicated. So we're trying to make it less complicated and support people. And we do that in a variety of ways with different learning modules for early career, mid-career, late career principals, and the way that we advocate for them here in the state and do mentoring. So that's part of our mission. And I just wanted to share this text. It's part of our foundational text for how we're helping members implement change that is lasting. I'm sure all of us in the field have seen things come and go, or kind of shiny objects that we think will be great for kids. But this is a resource that really helps embed systems change and looks at change through the lens of a system. So it'll improve the culture, all the systems, and the learning for all students. So, this webinar is really important to us. It's focused on the role of the school leader in creating and maintaining positive culture systems and learning, whether we're doing that virtually during a global pandemic or in the school building, or maybe a little bit of both, depending on how we return. And the series is broken into 3 90-minute sessions on 3 separate dates, and hopefully you've all been able to sign up for each of those. And I think I saw a question in the chat box that Megan may have already answered about if there's clock hours. There are clock hours available for these. And our 3rd session, the last session, will be a Q&A with presenters and some guest school leaders. And they're pretty simple 3 objectives for this. And it's to dig deep and to describe how trauma and extreme stress impacts our ability to learn and lead and our executive functioning skills. And the second goal is to identify guiding ideas and concrete steps that school leaders can take to support teachers and families, and particularly themselves emotionally, and to identify how the core features of MTSS, which are so important to embedding any systems deeply into the culture, systems, and learning, and the practices that go along with that and data can be shaped to help address and build protective factors for our school community now and once schools are back in buildings. So at AWSP, we know intimately the challenges for school leaders, and there are many. It's a nuanced job with endless details. So some of you have been serving meals, supporting childcare for the first time, which is quite different than education as we know it, and trying to determine how to do distance learning, all while envisioning these new possibilities for how school might look in the future. And after all, we're doing this in a global pandemic. There's no textbook or guide. So it's really essential to keep focus on taking care of ourselves during this time and each other, and helping, again, the culture, systems, and learning in our current context thrive as much as we can. And really, that's why having mental health experts to help inform and guide our thinking and how we support our own mental wellness and ourselves, staff, students, and families is just absolutely critical during this time. So today you'll hear some very practical strategies. At AWSP, we like to call them tools, tangibles, and takeaways. And we're doing that through the lens and knowledge that the need for systems and structures of MTSS has never been more important than it is right now. So as you listen to the presenters, you'll learn how to strengthen and expand your systems to be more effective and efficient during the COVID-19 shutdown and upon returning to school. So with that, I welcome all of you, and now I'll turn it over to Dr. Lori Langes.
All right, thank you, Kurt. So we're going to jump in today and start off, as Kurt kind of mentioned, today's focus is really for those of you out there that are on the administrative side of things. As we move into the next series, we'll be really saying, then as we take all of this back into the building, what are some practical strategies to make sure we can get it in place? And then that third session is open for us to take any and all of your questions. So I'm going to have my co-presenters, Jessica and Cher. We're going to just for a minute show ourselves, and then we're going to take all of our faces back off, so it's not distracting for us and for you. But we thought it would be fun to just introduce ourselves quickly in the fun fashion of things beyond just what we do for our jobs. And we thought it'd be fun to start off with the tale of three moms or three homeschooling moms, because we all have kids right now that are in our houses that we're trying to both work and school. And then you can see a little bit about each of us. So I think my biggest thing that I've been working on right now is my last bullet point, which is being a nerd. I have been learning how to play Dungeons and Dragons with my 14-year-old. So that's been really exciting. You can see for Cher, one of her fun things that she's been taking on is being a clean crafted wine distributor. So if you're looking for any clean crafted wines, you can contact her. And you can see for Jessica, two hobbies she's getting to build right now with some of the additional time is being an amazing hiker and enjoying her coffee. So with that, I'm going to turn my video back off. So as we jump in, we've got two polling questions that Megan is going to pop up for us. The first one is just learning a little bit about who you are. What is your role? We tried to do it broad, so hopefully you fit into one of these. So I'm watching as they're coming in. We're pretty high on district administrator, school administrator, and then district coaches. So those of you who are out coaching from an MTSS or a school change, school climate level. And we can see, okay, so we've got a pretty good distribution overall, but certainly heavy on the administrator side, which is what we expected with this particular webinar. So our next poll we're going to look at is your MTSS implementation. Where are you right now? And you know, all of you are in different roles. So this might be looking from your building level, if you're a building level admin, if you're a district level admin, where your district is at. So we've got a lot of people who are saying implementing, but not quite sure about fidelity. So where they're at in their implementation level. And as Jessica talks about systems a little later on, I think she'll be addressing some of this. We can see our next biggest bar is close to tier 1, close to fidelity in tier 1. And we also have a good amount of folks who are saying tier 2 and tier 3. So 12% so far are saying they're implementing all 3 tiers. So, all right, so we can see overall where people are at. That is great. It gives us a good sense too, as we're talking to you, places where we might want to adjust a little bit in what we're sharing with you. Okay, so we are going to move on from that. So one of the things we know right now is things just got messy. And Kurt already talked about this, but right now there's a need for the systems and structures that MTSS framework provides for us more than we've ever seen before. And so making sure, thinking about how do we capitalize on some of this time to make sure when we move back into the building in the fall in whatever fashion, because we know that's going to look different depending on where you're at, location wise and where we're at with the virus. But we know we're going to really need those strong systems as we're moving back in. We also know too that I've seen a lot of funny things about what it's been like for homeschooling for parents who haven't done this before, right? I've seen a lot about, that people are really realizing the importance of teachers and good teachers in schools. So teachers should be making about $1 billion a year. This is probably my favorite one, homeschooling day one. I'm wondering how I can get this kid transferred out of my class. So we're going to really look at how we strengthen MTSS and examine that lens around trauma, which is where we're going to start off, and that social-emotional learning and how to build those pieces up. Some of you joined us too. We presented a smaller version of this last week at MTSS Fest. I think it was last week. And we're really going to expand on that learning. No, even with the expansion of this 3-part webinar, as Cher likes to call this is really the tapas plate for bringing these pieces in. You could spend, as many of you know, multi-days training on each one of these 6 pieces. So we're not going to be able to train at that depth of the level. However, if you're seeing one of these that you feel like this is really important for where our building or our district needs to focus, please contact us through either Northwest PBIS or Sound Supports, and we are happy to help get you any of the services that you need. My computer's going a little crazy right now, so. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Cher, who's going to start talking to us about trauma responsiveness.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here to talk about trauma responsiveness, which means that we're going to go beyond trauma awareness and trauma informed and put our knowledge into action, which is very necessary right now. So I'm going to briefly touch upon trauma, ACEs, and toxic stress, so that we can focus on the big picture and frame our experience. And then we're going to move into some actionable items for you to take away from today. So toxic stress. So when the stress response is initiated, depending upon the amount, whether it's positive, tolerable, or toxic, our brains and our bodies are bathed in cortisol and adrenaline. So this is not such a bad thing to have a hit of these hormones before a test or a presentation, because they will help me remember what I want to say, remember what I want to put down for the test. Stress also activates our immune system, which is important all the time and especially now. So there are some positives to stress. It's just the amounts and how often. So if we experience stress too much and too often with little to no buffer, that's when we increase our allostatic load or the wear and tear on our brains and our bodies. So I have a couple questions for you. This past year, did you experience a high, a medium, or a low amount of stress? Okay, so just answer that for yourself. And then I'm going to also ask you, do you believe that stress is harmful to your brain and your body? Is that a yes? Or do you believe that it's just part of life and it's meant to be managed? So that would be no. Okay, so there's a study of over 30,000 folks about a decade and a half ago where they were asked the same questions I just asked you. And then the researchers waited about 8 or 9 years to check public health records and see the death or the mortality and the disease rates of the people in the study. And what you can imagine they found is that those who experienced a high amount of stress reported experiencing a high amount of stress had the highest rates of disease and mortality. But that was only if they believed stress was harmful to their brains and their bodies. In fact, the people who had reported the most stress and then didn't believe that stress was harmful, that it was just part of life and meant to be managed, had the lowest rates of disease and mortality. So there's a good amount of research to say that stress isn't the bad guy we make it out to be. that it's how we experience stress is physiological, and it's also about our mindset. So what are the stories we are telling ourselves? What's our self-talk like? What are our interpretations of this experience of stress? You can move on to the next one. Thank you. So trauma is the emotional, psychological, and physiological residue left over from heightened levels of toxic stress that come along with experiences of danger, violence, loss, or other life-threatening events. Young children are particularly vulnerable to the effects of trauma. Trauma is essentially an experience or series of experiences that your nervous system doesn't have the capacity to navigate and process. Trauma is really subjective and relative, and it's important to not minimize someone's experience, because as many people as there are in the Zoom room, that's how many unique nervous systems there are, and each of us have different capacities for different experiences. Many of you may be familiar with the term adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. We know now through a significant amount of research that what we experience in childhood impacts our mental and physical health trajectories in adulthood. The latest ACEs studies compared to the first one, which focused mostly on white, middle to upper class, well-educated individuals, focused on the broader population and came to some of the same conclusions as the first, that ACEs are common. Almost 2/3 of us have at least one. The higher the ACE score, the higher the likelihood of negative mental and physical health, although one ACE can be enough to experience these outcomes as well. What they found in the latest ACEs study, which is including, again, the broader representation of the population, is that there are certain populations that experience significantly more ACEs. So our poor, Black, Hispanic, or multiracial, LGBTQ community. Yet this really affects us all, because whether it's happened to us personally or someone that we know or someone that we're working with, it definitely affects us all. So what you might see in the behavior of colleagues and kids from the impact of the stress and the trauma and stress, we might see these in behavior, kids and adults. We need to recognize that adults are also experiencing the 4 Fs, which is the reaction from the amygdala when we're in the fight, flight, freeze, or a newly researched one is fawning, which means to befriend the threat, that as adults we're experiencing them as well. And so that exhibits itself in behavior. So we might be experiencing exhaustion, sadness, anxiety, irritation, confusion. We might be disconnecting, so really not engaged with our colleagues or work, students and families. And we may just have a lower bandwidth. Our bandwidth may be smaller because of the stress and overwhelm that we're feeling. We might also be experiencing compassion fatigue and or vicarious trauma. Compassion fatigue is the erosion of our mental or our emotional and physical well-being that helpers can experience if we aren't replenishing ourselves. Vicarious trauma indicates a shift in worldview as a result of working with folks who experience or have experienced trauma. In the helping professions, we're extremely vulnerable to either or both of these because we're also experiencing right now a collective trauma. Not only is this happening to others, it's happening to us too. So here are a few mindset shifts and strategies that can help us help our students navigate difficult life experiences in the best possible way, which please note is really different for each of us. First, we know that resilience factors are the buffer that can protect us from the negative mental and physical health outcomes from trauma and toxic stress. You can move to the next slide. Oh, we've got a reflection question, that's right. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you, what do you notice about yourself when you feel dysregulated? So having a check-in, kind of tuning into your internal landscape right now. What do you notice in yourself? Do you notice that dysregulation, the disconnection? Are you experiencing a lower capacity? And then just tune in, check in with yourself. How are you feeling this experience? Where do you notice that you even feel it in your body? Because we feel feelings in our bodies, and it's important to pay attention to that because emotions are signals from our brains that we need to pay attention to. Okay, so what's your capacity in a scale of 0 to 5 to be patient with yourself and with others, to learn new things, and even just to take care of those emotions that you might be on that emotional roller coaster that a lot of us are experiencing right now? And as leaders, it's really important to note what's happening in our own brains and bodies so that we can have an understanding of ourselves and others and be able to lead in the best possible way. Okay. So resilience. We also know that resilience is something that we can experience for a few reasons, and it's also something that we can be developed throughout our lives. That can be developed through social connection, wellness of our mind and body, asking for help, building our own social and emotional toolkit. Lots of different ways resilience can be built. Identifying our own resilience factors as well as the resilience in others will go a long way in reducing the wear and tear in our nervous systems. If we give in to our brain's tendency to pay more attention to what is going wrong, which is called negativity bias, we feel more overwhelmed. I call this an energy vampire. If we focus energy on the resilience of our community, we relieve overwhelm on our systems and have the motivation to tackle challenges. Also, folks don't need our worry energy right now or ever really. They need our I believe in you energy. Next slide. Second, we know so much more about the brain, including that we can essentially rewire our brains through healing and personal growth work, and that should give us a lot of hope for ourselves and for our students. So we're going to dive into one of the 3 components of trauma responsiveness. I'm going to be focusing on number 2 today, so support for the development of self-regulation. One of the most powerful resilience factors is the ability to self-regulate. When we experience difficult life circumstances, our nervous systems, namely our ability to self-regulate, is impacted. And we need to put a lot of intention and effort into soothing our nervous systems. Self-regulation essentially means the ability to act in desired ways regardless of our emotional state. So this doesn't mean that we actually become robots. In simple terms, it means we just don't say and do from a dysregulated state. We don't get mean with our mad or hurt with our sad. So these are phrases we typically use with kids, yet we, the adults, should also be continuously working on building our self-regulation toolkit. We can't expect more of kids than we're willing to give. It's on us to build our skill set so that we can model and teach kids. So I'm going to walk you through the basic steps of healthy emotional processing and then explain how you can use them in a school context to help students develop self-regulation. So consider this: we spend a lot of time and energy teaching students the steps to do a whole host of academic skills. Yet we don't explicitly teach one of the most foundational skills to mental and physical well-being, and that is how to navigate uncomfortable emotions. Next slide. Most of the adults working with kids never had the type of formal social and emotional education to build our emotional literacy. That needs to change by focusing on building staff's social and emotional skills as well as students' social and emotional skills. And as Brené Brown says so eloquently, transformational leaders and teachers have a deep understanding of their own emotional landscape and the landscape of others. So dysregulation on both sides of the relationship creates a lot of disconnection. It impacts our ability to build positive relationships with students, which students need in order to learn. They learn within relationships. Focusing on building self-regulation for kids and adults and building positive relationships, even through distance learning, or as I like to call it, crisis learning, will pay off massively in the end when it comes to academics and mental health outcomes. This is more important than ever because we want educators and kids to have the skills to soothe their nervous systems so the adults are ready to teach and the kids are in a ready state to learn. Kids cannot learn when their nervous systems are overwhelmed, and teachers will not be able to deliver the best instruction from that place either. Building resilience through self-regulation is a tier 1 intervention and a tier 2 and tier 3 intervention. So let's start with the steps for healthy emotional processing. Most of us, again, were not explicitly taught these steps to process our emotions healthy ways, yet having these tools is really handy, especially now. So this may be a process that you practice already, but you have a unique opportunity with everyone home to model and teach the skills that I'll be sharing with you. If this is an area of growth for you, which I think it is for everyone, then let's get to it. So the first step is to pause and check in with yourself. Right now, like I just had you do with the self-reflection, tuning into your internal landscape. So as soon as you feel the discomfort, anxiety creeps up, sadness, loss, anger, frustration, whatever uncomfortable emotion you're experiencing, pausing and checking in with yourself and buying yourself some time will be really helpful. That will shift us from reaction to responding wisely. My pause button is deep breaths. It's really helpful because I can do it anytime, anywhere. But when I start experiencing emotional discomfort, I'm going to pause and take a couple deep breaths and check in with what's going on with me. The next thing I'm going to do is name it to tame it, which is a phrase you might be familiar with if you're teaching a social and emotional curriculum in your building or district. It's really important, even as adults, to properly identify our emotions. We often stick with the same 3 to 5 emotions that we recognize in ourselves and in others. Yet, we need to be able to identify our emotions properly, and using a tool like a feelings chart can be really helpful. This is a chart that I use in my private practice. I used it when I was a school counselor. It's got a great range of emotions and gives us the proper vocabulary for identifying our emotions. This is especially helpful with teens. If teens don't have an appropriate vocabulary, kids in general don't have an appropriate vocabulary for identifying emotions, they might use phrases like, I'm going to kill myself, or I'm going to die if this happens. And we know that in a school setting, once students make statements like that some protocols are put into motion to make sure that they're safe. Yet if they have an appropriate vocabulary, they're going to be able to identify their emotions. Again, feelings are signals from our brains. So when we name our emotions, it allows our brains to say, all right, Cher knows she's feeling anxious right now. Now I'm going to let it go and move through the rest of the process. If I don't validate my experience by identifying my emotion, the brain's going to keep intensifying that emotion, and that gets really, really uncomfortable. The next step after naming our feelings is to use a feel-good plan or a bliss list, whatever you would like to call it. This is essentially a list of things that you can think, say, and do to soothe your nervous system. Again, really simple steps in this process, yet we need to be shifting from that autopilot of how we navigate emotions into more intentional work with it. So if you can model and teach this to your students, you can model and teach this to anybody that you're in relationship with. There are 3 things that should be on everybody's feel-good plan. First is deep breaths. When we are what I call in our amygdalas, when we are in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, our body sends oxygen out to our extremities so we're ready to do those things. So we need to be really intentional about bringing our breath back to center. So pausing throughout the day, taking a few deep breaths can be really helpful for your nervous system and relieve that load throughout the day. Second is movement. There's a ton of research out there that says that our brains and bodies are wired to need movement. So you can hula hoop, you can dance in your kitchen, you can walk and run, you can do jazzercise, you can do whatever you'd like. But just moving your body throughout the day is especially helpful for our nervous systems, especially with emotions like anxiety, where you're at kind of a low hum or a high hum. That helps move that anxious energy through and out your bodies. And then third is helpful self-talk. It is with our self-talk that we can make the mountains out of molehills or molehills out of mountains. And so we really need to check in with what the stories and thoughts that we have going on in our brains. Now, again, we can have stories, automatic thoughts and stories happening, but our human superpower, one of them, is to choose what we allow to stay on that brain space. So I was speaking to some educators the other day about feel-good plans and about automatic thoughts. And one educator mentioned that she likes to tell students that you can't, decide if a bird's going to poop on your head, but you can decide if it's going to nest there. So that's one example of how we can really try and master our thoughts so that we don't allow them to take up that residence in our brain space, but we master our thought space so that we can feel better and say and do better most of the time. Now, there are 2 things that should be on everybody, it shouldn't be on anybody's feel-good plan. That would be vices. So substances, shopping, gambling, certain types of food, things that are less healthy and definitely don't lead us closer to regulation. We want to avoid putting on our feel-good plan. We want this to be a list of go-to strategies that we can use often. And the second thing is screens, which is really difficult these days because a lot of us are on screens all day long. And so it looks a little differently right now, but in general, we want to steer clear of screens on our feel-good plans. And this is something that is great to communicate with students and families. Parents love the feel-good plan as a strategy. Having a feelings chart and then a feel-good plan is a great tool for parents as well. So passing this along to families can be really, really helpful. And so we don't want to have screens unless you're using something like Calm or Headspace app or YouTube channels that teach you some sort of mindfulness strategy. If you can practice the strategy away from the screen, then it's okay. That's a good exception to the no screens rule. But in general, we want to choose things that actually do regulate our nervous systems through and through. Research shows that our brains and bodies are way too active still on screens, and it's more of a distraction than it actually does the job to regulate us. The final step in healthy emotional processing is to problem solve and boundary set if needed. So we never want to do either of these things from a place of dysregulation. Setting healthy boundaries along with tools like self-regulation are foundational to protecting our good thoughts and feelings about ourselves and others, and it helps prevent burnout. If you're working nonstop and available all the time, you'll be depleted in no time, and maybe you're already experiencing this. So learning to set healthy boundaries is a training in and of itself, but consider where you can carve out time for yourself, believing, again, in the resilience of others, the ability of your staff and students to be okay if you're checking out for a bit. So I highly recommend or highly encourage you to get in front of your students, colleagues, families, and create feel-good plans or bliss lists together so that you have a universal language for self-care. Brainstorm ideas of things you can think, say, and do to calm down, and then give everyone 5 to 10 minutes to create a feel-good plan for home and school. You approve of the things that they're able to do in the school setting when we're back all together. Listening to music with headphones may be okay at home, but not at school, for example. So when it's needed, you can access it. Feel-good plans, feelings charts, they can be proactive and reactive strategies. We should be doing feel-good plan things throughout our day to relieve that pressure on our nervous system. We should be pausing to take deep breaths, step outside for some fresh air, stretch, call a friend, whatever it is to relieve that pressure on our nervous system. Then when we are experiencing discomfort, we can use it reactively as well and use extra feel-good plan stuff. It seems simple, yet it's highly effective when used consistently by adults and kids. So following these steps increases our bandwidth as our nervous system downregulates. This should be our #1 focus for ourselves and students as far as our social and emotional growth right now, so that we don't experience the long-term wear and tear in our systems. If students, families, and staff have access to strategies like this and practice them, there's an increased likelihood we will return to school ready to learn. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to predictability and consistency.
All right. I'm trying to navigate like unmuting at the top, and then I have to go back down to move my slides forward. So thank you for being patient as I navigate all of this. So it looked like from the polls, right, most of you are implementing some form of MTSS. Some people said maybe not with the fidelity that we want, but we are doing some implementation. When we think about creating predictability and consistency for our staff, I want to start there first from that administrator's lens. So staff can then increase predictability and consistency for students. One of the things you want to think about as you're planning for moving back into your buildings, and even planning for now as teachers are doing online support and schooling for their kids, is we've got to ramp up and enhance each tier. So when we think about tier 1, which is always a place we want to focus first because we get really the most outcome for our efforts at Tier 1. You might be thinking about things like you normally teach your school-wide expectations twice a year. You do your 5-to-1 positive to corrective reinforcement. I want you to start thinking about teaching several times a year, reteaching several times a year, looking at your data to come back to which expectations you may need to revisit again. I want you to think about that you may need to move up to an 8-to-1 positive to corrective or a 10-to-1, because what we know right now is that there's so much uncertainty, but we do know that kids are going to come back more dysregulated, having experienced trauma. Even kids who have a lot of resiliency factors built up in their life, this has been a hard transition. So to meet that, we're going to increase that predictability and consistency. So when we think about some of those pieces that we do, right, we know that our daily systems of academic and behavior routines and expectations really are going to lay the foundation for that psychosocial safety that is needed for both of our staff and our students. So we're going to talk through how do we do this thinking about students, but how are we going to make sure we're setting staff up for the most success? And when we think about over on the right, we kind of have a small example of one of those behavior expectations, right? So this is for coming in every day into the classroom. I have to make sure that this routine and transition is taught, modeled, retaught, and I'm very clear on what the adult expectations are that help the kids meet these student level expectations. So we want to think about our expectations for our students, because we know when we're unclear in our buildings, when we're seeing those behavioral errors that are going on, it is often going back to our systems aren't clear and our adult teaching is not clear. So we have to go back and look at both of those pieces. Are we really building in focused time on this and the high rates of reinforcement? In the second webinar, we're really going to take you through what does a 6-week plan look like to make this come to life. And we'll be hitting on the expectations pretty heavily. One of the pieces we see schools often take a misstep in is they've got their expectations for the students, but they don't look at what's needed for the adults, right? We want to make sure we're very clear about what are the skills we want the adults to be modeling for the students that help the students to see this is what the expectations look like in action. What are the expectations for the adults that help the kids meet the expectations? One of the common ones we hear about is that when coming in an elementary school from recess, paraprofessionals will say, I get all the kids lined up, they're ready to go, the bell rings, and the teachers are not here to meet their kids, right? That's a breakdown in the system. The students have done their part, but when the teachers don't do their part, it sends a signal that this expectation is really not important. We hear a lot of high school students say that they are often late to their classes because they don't feel like anything happens in the first few minutes, right? That's a lack of the adult expectations. So I want you to just pause for a minute and think about this. What are some ways you intentionally create consistency for your staff? Start there and think about that. What are the systems that are put in place in your building, or maybe the systems that should be put in place for your building that can increase the consistency for your staff? The second piece is, what are some ways you intentionally create consistency for your students? Right, beyond maybe just the traditional teaching the expectations, what are some ways that you can do that and ramp up that consistency for your students? The next part we're going to look at then is school connectedness. I cannot underscore the importance of school connectedness. If you want to be a school that's high achieving academically, you really have to focus on that culture of relationships, student voice, connectedness across your school. This is about that affective way that we hook kids in. They feel a part of our building, a part of our culture, a part of our learning. And when kids feel that, even if they don't feel strong academically, they're more willing to take those academic risks. So we know schools that do this well have higher attendance, have higher grades, get higher graduation rates when kids are moving through high school, if they really focus on that school connectedness. I want you to think about now, how are some ways you can strengthen that connection with staff? Because just like with the expectations, this has to start with your staff first. So what are the ways right now that you can make sure relationship is a key priority for you? How are you reaching out in a variety of ways to your staff? As we all know, everyone's stressed, and a lot of us are home and we're trying to manage and teach. And I can only imagine what it'd be like if I had young kids versus the teenagers that are upstairs right now, how stressful this could be. And staff need that connection. They need that reassurance from their administrators more than ever. And then what are ways when we're making sure that our staff have their needs taken care of, what are the fun ways we can connect with them as well? And we'll give you some examples of some fun things you can do with staff and students. You know, one are just these ways that we're connecting, and our only way to really connect right now is, well, one of our main ways is online. There are some other ways too, but there's a lot of fun ideas that are out there for connecting, and here's just some that I've either done myself or I've seen going on. We have a whole list of ideas on our soundsupportsk12.com website. So if you're looking for some of those, we'll put that website in the chat for you so you can see that. Thinking about some of those restorative based, so we do a lot of restorative training with schools. And what are some of those connections? These are connections you can do with your staff. Staff can use these same connection style questions for students. Again, we have a whole list of these on our website. But we've got to stop and we have to think about connection before content. When we think about rebooting next year, I want you to think about the first 2 to 3 weeks are really about connection before content and how we do that with students. And then how can you use this time? So we're taking care of our staff first so they can take care of the students. How can the staff then use this time to really do those connections with their kids? And you can use this time to focus on what are the school changes we might need to make, especially now that we've had this kind of new normal with COVID. It's a great time to revisit your school's mission. Does it really capture and say what your school is about and that connectedness, relationship building? What are some ways you can have that strong start? We'll go through that 6-week plan to help you to start to think about that in the next webinar. This is also a fantastic time to launch a family outreach initiative. And I know a lot of schools and districts have been engaged in this and really trying to outreach to the families who are not signing on for the online lessons with their teachers, aren't doing that engagement. And then examining your current discipline policies and practices. Do these current policies enhance your connectedness or actually break down that connectedness? And then whose job is it to build relationships? It's everybody's job. When we go into buildings and we're looking at expectations and how staff are engaging with students, we often see staff that they say, well, I'm not in the classroom, that's not part of my job. I don't teach expectations, I don't reinforce students, I don't hand out the Katja being good tickets. This is everybody's job in a building when we're doing this outreach, from the first person to see the kids as they walk in the door to the last person they might see on the end of the day. And then thinking about with some of this, we have to do restructuring of our schedules across the day to really build in that intentional relationships. I know reality is that you may not be able to restructure what your schedule is going to look like next year, especially with the stress of everything going on. But for the 21-22 school year, you might want to start to think about, if you already don't have an advisory period or students operating in houses or academies, maybe you're an elementary school that could engage in some looping where you stay K1 with the same teacher, 2-3 with the same teacher. What are ways you do transitional supports for kids grade to grade for those big transitions from elementary to middle and middle to high school? So thinking about what are some of those changes that you could make. Okay, so I'm going to mute off and Jessica's going to come on and start taking us through systems.
Thank you very much, Lori. I appreciate it. I feel like I'm just learning a ton from both of you, and I work with you every day almost. So thanks to Cher and Lori. I wanted to make a few comments before I get into our next poll. I'll give Megan a little cue. We're going to get that queued up. So Lori had asked for you to think about and reflect on how you're creating systems and consistency for your staff right now. And that's not just for your staff, it's also for yourselves, right? So we're making the investment in systems. We had about 49% of you said you were either not implementing or you were implementing but not sure of fidelity. So we're going to talk about the systems that we know, systems that we hope to know and build with the promise from not just some research, but from someone who's been doing this for a really long time, that our systems will give us kind of the backbone and the strength to work really as a team. It's not a magic bean. It does make things easier, and it gives us a model for problem solving. So before I get into our slides, thanks for that poll. If you can, Megan can open that up and folks can let us know, how familiar are you with the core features of MTSS PBIS? What are the core elements? And you may be in a school that's not implementing or a district that's not implementing yet, but you're rocking it, you know these things. So pick one of these numbers here. I see, we've got folks, hope you can see this. Looks like we've got a majority of our folks know them, not ready for a quiz, which is great. There's no quiz. This is a low stress, it's a low stress webinar. Excellent. We have about 64% of you have voted. Very good, thank you. Okay, so this is really helpful. So most of you have some grounding in this, or you can rattle them off really easily. Some of you are not really sure, but you know where to find this information. That's really helpful. And so one of the goals we have as a collective is to help all of you be good consumers of information, because there's a lot of great places to get information from, and then there's some not great places to get information from. And one of the things that we are increasingly concerned about as a field is that folks are going to start chasing the shiny object. Shiny objects are being thrown at all of you as administrators, as decision makers, the magic fix. And I'm going to ask Lori to advance to the next slide here. We have a real strength in our systems, however. And my favorite analogy, because I love hiking and generally working out, is that our systems are, the analogy for the strength of systems is a bit like exercise. I could say walking to my living room is technically exercise. However, it is not adequate for me to reap the benefits of said exercise. I will not see an appreciable difference in my blood pressure, in my cholesterol levels, in my my lung capacity, or my ability to do cardio just by walking to my living room and back. Systems are what give us strength and guide us as an entire school-wide team or district team. The consistent adult behaviors and the predictability are things that were inherent in Cher and Lori's presentations and the topics that they were talking through, creating that predictable environment. Our systems within the MTSS framework or PBIS framework allow us to be intentionally preventative. On purpose, we predict the places that our folks are going to have hangups, and we can be flexible and responsive. And just as a note, and then I'm going to do a quick impromptu activity for you to think about, but as a note, we all know very well, those of us on this call, that our systems can replicate and reinforce implicit bias. We understand that. We're looking for our systems to support one another and to make relationships. So implicit bias is another webinar topic, but it is absolutely worth mentioning. I don't want folks to think that we're just blazing past that, because that would be relationship damaging not to acknowledge that we have, we live in a country, we live in a culture where systems have indeed been used to oppress. So I want you to think for a second, because I talked about prevention. In terms of distance learning and your reality right now, I'd like you to reflect for just a second or two. You can have more than a second, but reflect on what are the areas where you can prevent yourself and your staff will have hangups. We'll have hangups. What preventing that? Or predicting those, because when we can predict it, we are much more likely to be able to prevent it and or mitigate the impact. And to make a very clear analogy and kind of link to teaching, think about how much of our actual work in front of kiddos and teaching academics is preventing errors. In fact, we have very exquisitely developed curricula across different content areas that point out the tricky bits and give kids extra practice. And I like to think about early reading. We point out the silent E, we point out the tricky vowel blends in the middle of the song, in the middle of the word. And we think about some higher grade learning in terms of high school, middle school. We have tricky dates or names in history. In science, we come up with ways to point those out. We give kiddos extra practice. So our systems allow us to do that, to intentionally prevent. So a reflection for you is, what are some of those things that we are having a hard time with right now? And if you think ahead to when you're going to be entering back into the building, predicting now where those hangups are going to be will let you start to really problem solve and address these issues. Next slide, please. We do create these strengths, these systems for our adults. MTSS, PBIS are about adult behaviors. And so the strength of those systems need to actually guide adults. Guide adults so adults can guide kiddos. And here's the good news and bad news. Adults have a longer and more kind of complete learning history. We have really learned some of these things because we've been practicing for all of our 40 plus years or however old we are. We are all operating within various systems, right? We all operate within various systems in our day-to-day life, in our schools, and investing in those systems so they are preventative, or investing in those systems so we're predicting and mitigating the impact of these difficult obstacles is investment in working easier, okay? Next slide, please. And the one thing I want to point out here is that I'd like us to think of our systems as a way to move away from reliance on a hero model to a system where all of us function in concert with one another. Okay, because I know I have a lot of you on this call who are absolute heroes, and you're doing it, a lot of it yourself, and you have the thought, I could pass that off, but I'm just going to do it myself. I want you to make the investment in the systems and distributions of tasks. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how to do that. Next slide, please. So our core MTSS PBIS systems, this was our last poll. The core systems are the way that we move away from that hero model, and we work towards working in concert with one another. We have effective leadership teams. We know about the makeup of those teams, the way those teams should be meeting and using data for decision making. We have comprehensive screening, a process for selection and implementation of our evidence-based practices, or EBPs. I have my letters flipped there. Our policies, and it's not just enough that we have the policies, but we have professional support in terms of training, coaching, feedback, and the communication. So those policies don't just live on a piece of paper. Next slide. We have district systems and school systems. So you'll notice that we have very similar systems across district and school, Our district system, at that level, we are the kind of 10,000-foot level, and we are actually making the decisions to allocate resources, to direct priorities. And for my district leaders, please listen very carefully. Your school teams are extremely limited in their ability to implement systems, be it MTSS or PBIS or interconnected system framework, our mental health integration. They are very underpowered to do that work without clear priority and leadership from districts. And this is an area of inherent stress between districts and school team members. We can mitigate the impact here if we have this district leadership team that is actually supporting professional development, feedback, decision-making, etc. The District Systems Fidelity Inventory, or the DSFI, is a planning tool that's available to those of you at the district level that will help you strengthen your systems. It will give you very detailed information about how you do that. Next slide. At our school level, following the priority of the district level, we're really thinking about three big pieces of the multi-tiered system at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And that covers teaming, evaluation, and implementation. The strength of a team, the strength and consistency of your evaluation and implementation, those things help to create the consistency within a school, right? We have an evaluation plan, we're doing it in the same way. We have an implementation plan, we're doing it in the same way. The team is helping to guide that direction. We're working in concert with one another. At that school level, we have the tiered fidelity inventory, which is an assessment and planning tool to help guide our work in developing these strong systems at the school level. Next slide. So a little bit of a warning that if you're doing the same thing as you've always done, you're going to get the same results you've always gotten. So if we're not purposefully shifting our systems to be nurturing, create relationships, put connection before the tasks and the core of things we have to do, right? So connect before correct. That's a good one. I'm channeling my inner Johnny Fu right now. If we're not purposefully reworking our systems, we're going to perpetuate what we've always been perpetuating. We're going to be in a position of forcing or coercion. We may be oppressing and marginalizing. A lot of our systems have pushed us traditionally to act outside of our values as educators and administrators. We do this work because we love our kiddos, we love our families, and we really love and value each other. So it is okay. We created these systems to begin with, and we get to change these systems, starting with thinking about our values. Next slide, please. We start our mission and our value statements as a district. I've never read one that says we will harm kids and family or fellow staff members, but only if they really deserve it. We don't do that. We don't say that. And yet, as Lori mentioned, some of our strategies and policies and practices have eroded or at a minimum devalued relationships. So when we talk about our Venn diagram of awesomeness, otherwise known as our 4 elements of positive behavior support, we start with those valued outcomes, and this is our mission. Everything aligns from our valued outcomes, and we need that stakeholder voice in this process. I've been stalking some of you on Twitter and asking questions, and I'm seeing some really amazing examples about how that stakeholder voice or family and student voice has been really driving your focus and your value mission, right? The mission you're putting out there that encompasses your value. So our next slide, please. One thing that you can do right now to kind of to give yourself some of this links back to what Cher had said, thinking about collectively, what is your valued outcome? What are your valued outcomes right now? What is your personal valued outcome? So you can think of this in the micro or macro. If you can identify your valued outcomes related to stress, well-being, and connection to yourself and others, you can ask yourself, are the systems you have control of supporting living according to your values? And on the flip side of that, are you creating systems for your teachers and your families and your students that reflect your values, right? There's something for us to think about, the alignment of our values and that kind of actual manifestation of those values in our day-to-day work. I want you to think about how you focus the work right now, okay? I know you are a bunch of heroes. You've all got capes on, and we have a limited bandwidth. I think it was a great explanation of the impact of stress, toxic stress and trauma on all of us, how we learn, how we connect with one another. So we want to think about depth and not breadth. And you can think about your systems in this way. You're building deep, strong systems. I've never told anyone or suggested that everyone go build all of their MTSS systems in one day or even 1 year. So think about the quality of those systems. We are here collectively through this webinar and other webinars to give you permission to create those boundaries, to think about the depth of the work and focus it. Our current capacity for learning is very, very limited. So we are able to do a handful of things, and we'd like you to create some boundaries to do the handful of things well, and also give your teachers permission for that as well. A concrete example is in our distance learning, we are asking our teachers to make sure every distance learning opportunity starts with a personal connection. That's what we're really going to get good at. We're going to say every kid's name. We may do that by doing a phone call. We may do that on a Google platform, making sure that our paper packets that go home say things like the beginning of the page, hey, hope you're doing great, really miss you, right? So they're being very limited and purposeful in how we're doing that. We also want to think about flexibility. So Lori's going to flip us through 2 slides in a row. Strong systems allow us to be preventative and flexible. So we have some lessons from sustainability, which is our next slide. How do we do this? How do we actually create flexibility within systems? Systems are not rigid. So we need clear priority and direction from leadership. A clear priority and direction, and we want multiple people to be able to do the same job. So do you have a handful of teachers that are creating learning activities that can be used across grade levels or across classrooms, right? Multiple people to do the same job. We want that active support. We've created our priorities, we have some capacity building, and we would like to, we're gonna hop on as administrators, hop into these Google meetings, hop onto the group phone calls. We're gonna have our teach and remind our shared expectations and provide that feedback. So if you have distance learning expectations, congratulations, fabulous. Have you added a teacher supports the work row? So we have a row along that bottom. That's one of our mechanisms we use in school-wide PBS, and we can map that onto our distance learning expectations. And what's wonderful about creating consistency at this point in time is that we can carry that forward to when we're back in a school building, right? And that feedback loop. So are you as administrators able to get on to these distance meetings with teachers, listen to how they're interacting with kiddos and give them feedback, even if that feedback is just to say, man, thank you so much. I really like how you did X, Y, and Z. Think back to Lori's recommendation of dosing up that behavior-specific praise, because that is a protective factor for all of us. And it's not just a protective factor for kiddos, it's a protective factor for those of us giving that praise. When we're giving praise, we're avoiding the no, don't stop. When we're doing no, don't stop, and we're looking for the things that are wrong, we're spiking our cortisol. We can avoid that. Part of sustainability and being flexible is our documenting and accountability and having choice. So how can you build in choice and flexibility for yourself and your teachers? Here are some examples. Okay, so we want some choice and some autonomy for folks. We're hearing some really crazy things from around the country about what teachers are being made to do in the name of rigorous instruction, in the name of, we're going to grade everyone, we're going to do this, this, and this. Well, we want to just kind of back off a little bit and think about how we create choice. So we have shared office hours by grade level. We can ensure teachers can tag out or have a backup. So Kelsey's my backup if I can't be in office hours today, or I can't get to my grading today at this time. We can reuse the same activities with different examples. So we're creating that bank and we're reusing. Another one, we have a Google folder. We're all entering information in by grade level so teachers can take it as they need to. We can create some non-negotiables, but also negotiables. for how we work our assignments, our roles and responsibilities, our meetings, etc. So we're investing our time and energy in documenting, so it's there and we don't have to guess, we don't have to learn it all, and that shared work. Our next slide, and I believe we're up to Lori now. Unless it's me for the rest of the time.
No, I had to then get back up to my mute. So we're actually going to have, Kurt is going to do a wrap up here for us, and
Great.
then we'll all come back on visually so people can see us, and we'll have some time to take some questions and answers. So I'll turn it over to Kurt.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Linus. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I was just jotting down so many things during this presentation that we're going to bring back to our members in different committee meetings and replay this webinar. So thank you for your expertise to all of you. It's so nice being partners and friends with all of you as well. Just a couple of takeaways for me. Even just like kind of quick phrases to remember that I know are going to stick with me. Like, don't get mean with your mad or hurt with your sad. Name it to tame it. Connections before corrections. And then building choice and flexibility for yourself and staff. And then another one that I hadn't heard before that makes so much sense because of the nuance and complexity that I talked about with the principalship is, and I think Dr. Swain Bradway mentioned it, tricky bits. There's so many tricky bits in what we do, tricky bits in the principalship. And that reminds me of how MTSS can help with those tricky bits because as I'd mentioned at the onset, it's really never been more important than it is right now to have systems and structures in place to help us think through all those tricky bits. So thank you to all of you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey to help us go through our Q&A.
All right, thank you. Okay, if everybody could come back on with your cameras, it would be great to see everyone. That includes Kurt and me. For those of you playing along at home, you'll notice we've all color-coded ourselves today for you. So have that going for us. Again, a huge thanks for me. It's always so fun to work with all of you, and I just appreciate how quickly you all have used your expertise and kind of adapted existing material to meet the current needs. So just a huge thanks from us. So we've got a few questions and just a little bit of time here. So let me go through some of these. And you all can just decide who wants to answer. So here's a question. School connectedness is very difficult to do at this time. Any ideas given the virtual nature of school right now?
Yes, and I'm assuming Jessica has some ideas too, but you know, some of those ones I put up for doing some of the online connections are great. Also too, I've seen examples of staff going by and dropping little signs and care packages at students' doors, at administrators doing that for staff, you know, letters in the mail. I mean, so going back to some things that we traditionally think of, like the good news postcards that maybe schools send home, you know, doing some of that. What are the ways, especially when we start to look at our kids who are not showing up on those online learnings? So looking at those students, and if we can do some additional outreach, phone calls, different ways to try to connect with those families. But yeah, it's certainly tricky when we can't be in person, but it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm. We at my district, actually, my school did a teacher parade. The teachers drove the bus route and they made signs on their cars, and we all stood outside with our signs and kind of lined the streets, and it was pretty amazing. And we're planning to do that again. It was something very little. It didn't take much time, but it was just a concrete show. I'm thinking of positive phone chains. So, you know, I call Kelsey, Kelsey calls Kurt, and it can be spread out across several days because we know some of our teachers have a large number of students that they're working with. Those are just a few of the ideas. And I like the kind of connection, the games and the activities, Laura, that you had shared on your slides.
Yeah.
They're great.
I'd like to add too, I was talking to a high school the other day, high school staff, and I had pulled my 3 boys, they're ranging in age from 14 to 18, and asked them what they liked, what they appreciated as far as contact with school. And they really enjoyed or appreciated just encouragement. Hey, saw that you turned this in, great job, just little notes. So even just super simple, low burden strategies can be a great way to connect. Send out a little Google poll with a fun question that just builds the relationship and gets to know the student on a personal level, obviously keeping everything appropriate, can be really, really helpful. So just even thinking really small, low burden things can be a great way to connect with students and build that relationship so that when you're in front of them again, it's going to be there.
Great. All right. So another question is, I work with teachers who are informed and given feedback on implementing social emotional learning in the classroom. And they say, I'm a 5th grade teacher, I'm not a counselor, or my contract says I teach academics. So what are some strategies to address that resistance to teaching social emotional learning?
Because I joke that it's whiskey and chocolate.
That's Jessica's strategy.
That's my strategy. I think we have a really great opportunity. I know Cher will build on this. For right now, we're all having this very visceral emotional reaction to the stress and the trauma that's not just within our own lives, but in many cases outside of us, running wild. And so I think we have the opportunity to push hard on and saying, we all need this at a very high level, because we're being bombarded by stress. And this is how we protect each other. This is again where the district leadership and priority is very, very important. Remember, I said your school teams and will only have so much power, because you're going to have a teacher who says, well, the superintendent didn't say it, right? We've heard that as well. So Cher, what do you think?
You know, this is I think is a real big conversation, and we could go on for a long time about getting staff buy-in for SEL. I think it can boil down to the competency loop. You know, oftentimes we feel unskilled to deliver that kind of curriculum because we're not counselors. Yet the more social and emotional skills we have as adults, the more skilled we feel to present it and integrate it into our academics. It really should not, in best practice, be done in a silo where you have a lesson once a week and then the rest of the week you don't touch it at all. It really needs to be integrated. And we've seen that schools are a great delivery model right now. I mean, we know that schools are delivering meals and much needed money and supplies and all kinds of things to students right now. It is a delivery platform for needed life skills. And it really, the more skills we build as the adults, the more likely we are to be okay with delivering the material. So focusing on building adult skills, that increases our capacity. We feel more confident and competent when we have more skills. Our bandwidth is increased, which oftentimes that's one of the barriers, is that we feel like it's just too much and it's one more thing on our plate. And so increasing our own adult capacity so that we can show up better for kids is going to be well worth the effort to put focus there.
And I'll just add to that. You know, I think it's everyone's job, and I may have heard this from Cher or Jessica or Lori or Kelsey at one point in our conversations, that it's everyone's job. It's everyone's job to make sure we're all mentally healthy in our environments. And I think we can also talk about the fact that learning just will not happen if the adults and kids are having a tough time recognizing their emotions and regulating their emotional state and doing all the things that were shared today. I do agree that it's a little different if we're trying to have these lessons each week. That's not going to work. And it reminds me of the integrated systems framework, that if we get more and more familiar with that, then I think it'll seem like more of a natural thing, like we do with PBIS or any other any other multi-tiered system.
All right, so we've really come to the end of our time today. We'll save the other questions and carry those on to our session on June 4th. If you've submitted a question and you really need an answer before then, I know that any of these folks that are on today would be happy to respond to that. So Lori has up here the next couple of sessions. Hopefully you all have registered for that and continue our time together. You want to go to the next slide? Reminder to bring your questions back on June 4th. And then some great resources that we have here for you. And then the next slide has email addresses for Lori and Jessica and Cher. And then the next slide is redundancy builds fluency. So just another reminder to join us for the next 2 sessions in the series. And then the next slide is a reminder of our well-being series and the other ways that you and your staff and your families and students can engage with us in these free events. All right, thank you all again for joining us. Keep in touch. We'll talk to you all soon.